The council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from across the galaxy took their seats. Representatives of the Savari adjusted their translators, while the insectoid Kraven clicked their mandibles in agitation. Something unusual was happening today, and everyone knew it. The circular hall stretched wide enough to hold 300 beings, its walls made of crystalline material that reflected light from a dozen different suns. David Walsh sat quietly at the human delegation table, reviewing documents on his tablet. His gray suit looked plain compared to the elaborate robes and armor worn by other species. A young aide named Rebecca sat beside him, her fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. She had only been working in the diplomatic corps for 6 months and had never seen anything like this. The doors at the far end of the chamber burst open. 20 Vrathari warriors marched inside, their crimson armor gleaming under the lights. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, their 4 arms carrying ceremonial weapons that looked anything but ceremonial. The crowd fell silent as the warriors formed 2 lines, creating a path. War Commander Druven entered next. His armor bore more decorations than his soldiers, marking countless victories across 17 conquered systems. His people had built an empire through strength and intimidation, and he carried himself like someone who had never known defeat. 2 advisors flanked him, carrying data tablets and recording devices. The council speaker, an elderly Savari named Marala, rose from her elevated seat. Her purple skin had faded with age, but her voice still commanded respect. War Commander Druven of the Vrathari Empire, you requested this emergency session. The council recognizes you. Druven stepped forward, his metal boots echoing across the quiet chamber. Honored delegates, I come bearing a formal declaration. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The Vrathari Empire hereby claims the Sol system and all territories occupied by the species known as humanity. We offer them the honor of tributary status within our great empire. Gasps erupted throughout the chamber. Several delegates immediately activated their communication devices. The Kraven representative stood, antennae twitching wildly. This is unprecedented. Humanity holds council observer status. Observer status, Druven emphasized. Not full membership. They are unprotected by council law. He activated a holographic display showing Earth and its surrounding space. Our intelligence has completed a thorough assessment. Humanity possesses fewer than 200 military vessels. Their weapons technology lags behind council standards by at least 50 years. Their defense stations orbit only their home world and 3 colonies. The display shifted to show tactical breakdowns and force comparisons. A single Vrathari battle group could overwhelm their entire fleet. We offer subjugation rather than annihilation because we are a civilized empire. His tone suggested he considered this generosity remarkable. Rebecca leaned toward David, whispering urgently, "Sir, shouldn't we respond? File a protest?" David held up one hand, still reading his tablet. His expression remained calm, almost bored. He seemed more interested in whatever document he was reviewing than in the war declaration happening 10 feet away. Marala looked troubled. This is highly irregular. The council should discuss. There is nothing to discuss, Druven interrupted. We are informing the council as a courtesy. Humanity will accept our terms within 30 standard days, or we will take the Sol system by force. That was when David started laughing. It began as a quiet chuckle, barely audible. Then it grew louder, echoing across the silent chamber. Every head turned toward the human delegation. Rebecca stared at her superior in shock. David set down his tablet, removed his glasses to wipe his eyes, and continued laughing. Druven's expression darkened. You dare mock the Vrathari Empire? David stood, still smiling. He was average height for a human, which made him shorter than most species present, but he showed no intimidation. I apologize, War Commander. That was rude of me. He composed himself, though amusement still played around his eyes. I just need to clarify something before we proceed. Clarify what? Druven demanded. Your intelligence report on humanity. How far back did your research go? David picked up his tablet again, scrolling through information. What time period did you study? One of Druven's advisors consulted his own device. We analyzed the most recent 200 years of human activity, military capabilities, industrial output, population distribution, technological advancement. David's smile widened. 200 years, I see. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with several older delegates. The Savari ambassador had gone very still. A few others were checking their own databases, faces showing dawning realization. Is there a problem with our methodology? Druven asked, irritation creeping into his voice. Not a problem exactly, David said carefully. More of an oversight. You see, 200 years ago is right around when humanity stopped doing something we had been doing for our entire history. Stop doing what? David looked directly at Druven, fighting each other. Confused murmurs rippled through the chamber. Rebecca looked as puzzled as the aliens. David continued, his tone conversational but his words precise. War Commander, your intelligence is accurate for recent human activity. We do have limited military forces. Our weapons are designed for peacekeeping. Our defense grid is minimal. He paused. But that's because we don't need more. Exactly my point, Druven said triumphantly. You lack proper military preparation. No, David corrected gently. We lack current military deployment. There's a significant difference. He activated his own holographic display, showing historical data. You researched what we have. You didn't research what we were. The display showed images from human history. Battlefields, weapons, fortifications. Numbers began appearing, casualty counts from conflicts most species had never heard of. Millions dead, tens of millions. Numbers that made several delegates recoil in horror. Before humanity unified, David said quietly, we spent 10,000 years perfecting one particular skill. We got very, very good at it. Druven stared at the numbers. This is exaggeration, propaganda. Morales spoke, her voice somber. It is not. I have read their histories. War Commander, perhaps you should reconsider. I reconsider nothing. Druven's four hands clenched into fists. Past savagery means nothing against disciplined military force. David closed his display and smiled again, but this time there was no humor in it. Then perhaps we should test that theory. The chamber fell into stunned silence. David's words hung in the air like a challenge, and Druven's expression shifted from anger to calculating interest. The War Commander regarded the human with new attention, trying to determine if this was bravado or genuine confidence. You propose a contest, Druven asked slowly. A demonstration, David corrected. A war game, if you will, one of your battle groups against one of our vessels. Neutral council observers to monitor everything. He gestured to the assembled delegates. If your forces win, humanity will accept tributary status without resistance. If our ship wins, you withdraw all claims to the Sol system. Rebecca grabbed David's arm. Sir, you can't be serious. One ship against a battle group. David patted her hand reassuringly but kept his eyes on Druven. One standard patrol frigate. Nothing special, nothing experimental. Just a regular ship from our peacekeeping fleet. Druven's advisors leaned in, whispering urgently to their commander. The War Commander listened, then waved them away. Your proposal intrigues me. It would save resources and provide valuable data. He straightened, his four arms spreading wide. The Vrathari Empire accepts. We shall crush your vessel and prove our superiority before the entire council. Morales stood again, her voice concerned. This is highly unusual. The council has never sanctioned such an engagement. Then now is an excellent time to start, David said pleasantly. Consider it a peacekeeping measure. Better one controlled demonstration than an actual war, wouldn't you agree? The Savari elder looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The council will arrange neutral observers and establish rules of engagement. Where will this take place? The Kellen Expanse, Druven said immediately. Neutral territory, plenty of space for maneuvering. We can position forces within 3 standard days. Agreed, David said. 3 days gives both sides time to prepare. Within an hour, the council had hammered out the details. The engagement would be non-lethal where possible, with both sides using live weapons but agreeing to accept surrender if systems became critically damaged. Council observer ships from 5 different species would monitor from a safe distance. Every sensor reading would be recorded and verified. As the session ended and delegates filed out, still murmuring about the unprecedented event, the Savari ambassador approached David. Her name was Talira, and she had served in the diplomatic corps for over 60 years. She studied the human with ancient, knowing eyes. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said quietly. David smiled. "Maybe both, but I've read the reports on Vrathari tactics. They're good but predictable. Their empire grew through fighting species that had never experienced real warfare. And humanity has. We invented it," David said simply. "Every terrible thing they might do in battle, we've already done to each other. Every tactic, every strategy, every weapon concept. We spent thousands of years studying nothing but how to kill our own kind more efficiently." He looked at her seriously. "We only stopped because we finally scared ourselves enough to change." Talira's skin shifted to a darker purple, a sign of deep thought among her people. "I have studied your histories, as I mentioned in the chamber. The numbers still disturb me. Your species lost more individuals in single conflicts than some civilizations have in their entire existence." "I know," David said softly. "That's why we chose peace. Not because we couldn't fight, but because we knew exactly what fighting costs." "The Vrathari do not know this," Talira observed. "No, they've conquered 17 systems, but they've never faced real resistance. Their wars were more like occupations." David picked up his tablet. "In 3 days, they're going to learn something new." Rebecca had been listening quietly. Now she spoke up, her voice uncertain. "Sir, what ship are we sending, and who's commanding it?" David pulled up a file on his tablet. "The Richmond, 42 years old, Archer-class frigate. She's been doing patrol duty in the outer colonies for the past decade." He scrolled through personnel files. "Captain Ann Akaffer, 20 years of service, including 5 years in the reserve fleet before that." "Reserve fleet," Rebecca frowned. "I've never heard of that." "Most people haven't," David said. "It's what we call the military forces that stood down after the Consolidation Wars. Ships, personnel, equipment, all maintained in storage just in case." He looked at his young aide. "The Richmond is a training vessel now. She takes recruits on 6-month rotations to teach them basic ship operations." Rebecca's eyes widened. "We're sending a training ship against a Vrathari battle group." "A training ship," David agreed, "crewed by instructors who used to fly in the real military. People who remember when fighting was what we did best." He closed the tablet. "The Richmond isn't our strongest ship, Rebecca. She's just the one we can spare most easily." 3 days later, the Kellen Expanse filled with vessels. Druven's battle group arrived first, 6 warships arranged in an impressive formation. The flagship alone massed 3 times what the Richmond would. Fighters launched in coordinated squadrons, their movements precise and practiced. Support drones deployed in defensive screens. It was a display meant to intimidate. The Council observer ships took positions at a safe distance, their sensors recording everything. Talira watched from the lead observation vessel, her expression unreadable. Then the Richmond appeared. She looked small compared to the Vrathari fleet, her hull showing the wear of decades in service. No fancy maneuvers, no aggressive posturing. She simply took position in the designated area and waited. Druven opened a communication channel, his image appearing on screens throughout the observation ships. Human vessel Richmond, this is War Commander Druven. Surrender now and spare yourself the humiliation of defeat. The response came from a woman's voice, calm and professional. War Commander, this is Captain Ann Ockhaffer of the Richmond. I'm required to ask if your forces are ready to begin the engagement. We have been ready since we arrived, Druven said dismissively. Your tiny ship cannot hope to. Understood, Anne interrupted politely. Beginning engagement now, Richmond out. The channel closed. For 3 seconds nothing happened. Then the Richmond vanished from every sensor in the area. Druven shouted orders, his crews frantically searching for the human ship. The council observers checked their equipment, wondering if something had malfunctioned. The Richmond reappeared directly behind the Vrathari formation, and the battle began. The Vrathari flagship's communication systems died first. Anne had targeted the antenna arrays with surgical precision, firing focused electromagnetic pulses that fried circuits without penetrating the hull. Druven found himself suddenly blind to half his fleet's status reports, his command console flickering with error messages. All ships target that frigate, he roared into his local communicator. Concentrated fire. The Vrathari warships pivoted, their weapon systems charging. But the Richmond was already gone again, her electronic warfare suite making her effectively invisible to their targeting computers. The council observers could track her only because they used different sensor technology, watching in amazement as the small frigate danced between the larger vessels. 2 more Vrathari ships lost power to their weapons in quick succession. Anne's tactical officer had identified a weakness in their shield harmonics, a tiny flaw that allowed precisely calibrated energy bursts to slip through and disable power relays. The Vrathari had never needed to protect against such attacks because none of their previous enemies had known to look for such vulnerabilities. Launch all fighters, Druven commanded. Overwhelm their point defense. 400 Vrathari fighters screamed from their launch bays, filling space with small, agile craft. Their pilots were good, trained in formations that had served the Empire well in past conquests. They came at the Richmond in waves, firing missiles and energy weapons. The Richmond's point defense system activated. What happened next would be analyzed by military academies for years to come. The human ship didn't just shoot down incoming fighters. It calculated trajectories with such accuracy that destroyed fighters collided with those behind them. Missiles were detonated at precise moments to create chain reactions. In 90 seconds, over half the Vrathari fighter wing was disabled or destroyed, and the survivors were pulling back in disarray. Impossible, Druven muttered, watching his tactical display. This cannot be a standard vessel. On the observation ships, Talira leaned forward in her seat. How are they doing this? She asked her sensor operator. The young technician checked his readings 3 times before answering. Ambassador, the Richmond is using technology we recognize. Nothing exotic or experimental, but they're using it in ways we've never seen. Their targeting solutions factor in variables our computers don't even measure. Show me their reactor output, Talira ordered. The display shifted. They're operating at 60% power, Ambassador. Talira's skin shifted to pale purple, the color of shock among her people. They're holding back. Back in the engagement zone, Anne studied her tactical board with satisfaction. Her crew had trained for scenarios like this, running simulations against opponents who fought by the book. The Vrathari were skilled, but their tactics followed predictable patterns. They had numerical superiority and excellent equipment, but they'd never faced an enemy that understood warfare at a fundamental level. Ma'am, enemy flagship is attempting to withdraw, her sensor officer reported. Let them go, Anne said. We're not here to humiliate them, just prove a point. She opened a channel to the remaining active Vrathari vessels. Vrathari forces, this is the Richmond. Your flagship is disabled, 70% of your fighter wing is out of action, and 4 of your 6 warships have lost primary weapons. We can continue, or you can stand down. Druven sat in his darkened command center, surrounded by flashing warning lights. His 4 hands gripped the armrests of his command chair hard enough to leave dents. Around him, his crew worked frantically to restore basic systems. The battle had lasted 14 minutes. 14 minutes against 1 small human ship. War Commander, his second officer said quietly, we should accept their terms. Never, Druven growled. Deploy the reserve drones. Use the kinetic missiles we still have. Sir, his second officer's voice was firm. We have lost. Continuing will only result in casualties. The engagement was meant to be a demonstration, not a fight to the death. Druven closed his eyes. Every instinct screamed at him to fight on, to restore his honor through victory. But he was a warrior, not a fool. The human ship had disabled his forces without killing anyone, demonstrating a level of precision his own forces could never match. If this was what humanity sent to train recruits, what would their actual warships be capable of? Signal our surrender, he said finally, the words tasting like ash. Anne received the surrender and immediately powered down her weapons. Council observers, this is Captain Akafor. The engagement has concluded. Request you verify all systems and casualties. The Council ships moved in, their sensors sweeping both fleets. The final report showed 0 fatalities on either side, though the Vrathari had extensive equipment damage and over 200 injured from fighter crashes and systems failures. The Richmond had taken exactly 3 hits, none of which penetrated her shields. Captain Akafor, came Talira's voice over the communication channel. The Council thanks you for your restraint. We are transmitting medical ships to assist the Vrathari wounded. Appreciated, Ambassador. Richmond standing by to offer any assistance needed. Druven requested a private channel with Anne. When her image appeared on his screen, he studied the human woman carefully. She looked tired but professional, her dark skin gleaming with perspiration from the stress of combat. No gloating, no triumph in her expression, just competence. You have won, he said formally. I honor my agreement. The Vrathari Empire withdraws all claims to the Sol system. Thank you, War Commander, Anne replied. For what it's worth, your crews fought well. They followed orders, maintained formation under pressure, and showed courage. But it was not enough. No, Anne agreed. May I speak candidly? Druven gestured for her to continue. Her empire has grown through conquering species that never developed sophisticated military doctrine. You faced resistance, but never real warfare. The Richmond is 40 years old, War Commander. She's a training ship. We use her to teach new recruits basic operations. Anne leaned forward slightly. If you want to understand why you lost, study human military history, not the past 200 years, the 10,000 years before that. Then you'll understand what we chose to walk away from. Druven absorbed her words. And if we had continued our attack on Earth? Anne's expression became cold. Then you would have learned those lessons the hard way. Be grateful you chose this path instead. The channel closed. Druven sat in darkness, contemplating the terrifying truth. Humanity had been holding back. This entire demonstration had been them showing mercy. His empire had declared war on monsters who had learned to be peaceful, and only by pure luck had they discovered this before blood was spilled. On the Richmond, Anne addressed her crew over the ship-wide intercom. Well done, everyone. Set course for home. And someone get engineering to look at that portside shield emitter. It's running warm. Her crew erupted in cheers, relief and pride mixing together. They had done their duty and prevented a war. It was a good day's work. The council chamber was packed 3 days after the engagement. Every delegate had returned, many bringing additional staff. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about what happened in the Kellan expanse, and species that normally ignored council business suddenly wanted to understand what they had witnessed. David sat at the human delegation table again, this time with Rebecca and two military advisors. Captain Ann Ockhafer stood behind them in her dress uniform, looking uncomfortable with all the attention. She preferred the bridge of a ship to political chambers. Marala called the session to order, her voice carrying through the silent hall. We convened to discuss the implications of the recent engagement between Vrathari and human forces. War Commander Druven has requested the opportunity to address the council. Druven entered without his warriors this time. He wore simple armor, his weapons left outside per council protocol. He looked diminished somehow, though he still stood taller than most species present. The confidence that had radiated from him before was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Respect, perhaps, or fear. Honored delegates, Druven began. The Vrathari Empire acknowledges its error in judgment regarding humanity. We have withdrawn all territorial claims and wish to establish peaceful relations. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. I have studied the historical records that the human delegation recommended. I now understand our mistake. Would you share your findings with the council? Marala asked gently. Druven activated a holographic display showing data he had compiled. Most species achieve space travel by redirecting resources from military to scientific pursuits. The typical pattern is small conflicts, resource competition, then cooperation as the species matures. He changed the display. Humanity followed a different path. Images appeared showing human conflicts through the centuries, armies numbering in millions, cities destroyed, technologies developed solely to kill more efficiently. The numbers made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Humanity reached space not by abandoning warfare but by perfecting it, Druven continued. Their world wars involved entire continents. Their weapons became powerful enough to destroy their own planet. They developed artificial intelligence for military purposes, created biological weapons, and split atoms to make bombs. He looked around the chamber. They colonized other worlds while still fighting among themselves. A new image appeared, showing Earth's moon. The first human settlements on Luna were military installations. Both sides in their Cold War built missile silos and defense platforms. They reached space through competition in weapons development. David watched the presentation calmly, his expression neutral. Anne stood rigid, remembering stories her grandfather had told about serving in the consolidation wars that finally unified humanity. Then something changed, Druven said, his voice quieter now. About 150 years ago, humanity fought what they called the Consolidation Wars. 3 billion people under arms. Battles fought across 4 planets and dozens of orbital stations. Weapons that made their previous conflicts look primitive. He paused. They nearly destroyed themselves. The display showed the aftermath. Cities rebuilt, treaties signed, massive fleets being systematically dismantled or placed in storage. Humanity made a collective choice. They stopped, not because they were conquered or exhausted, but because they finally understood the cost of their own nature. Talira spoke up from her seat. War Commander, why do you believe this information is relevant to the Council? Druven looked at her directly. Because the human forces we see today are not representative of their true military capability. They are the peacekeepers, the minimum force necessary to maintain order. He gestured to Anne. Captain Ockhafer's ship is a training vessel, yet it defeated a Vrathari battle group in 14 minutes. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Several delegates checked their own records of the engagement, as if hopping the numbers might have changed. I asked the human delegation what would happen if a real threat emerged, Druven continued. They showed me projections. The display changed again, showing data that made even Druven look uncomfortable. Humanity maintains what they call the reserve fleet, thousands of warships in storage facilities maintained by retired personnel. These ships can be reactivated within weeks. Surely old ships cannot compete with modern designs, said the Kraven representative. David stood. May I address that concern? At Morala's nod, he approached the display. Our reserve ships were built during the Consolidation Wars. That was 50 years after the Richmond's design. They're more advanced, not less. We keep them in storage because we don't need them, not because they're obsolete. He pulled up new data. But ships are only part of the picture. 60% of human civilian vessels are built with military conversion capability. Every major space station can be configured as a weapons platform. Our mining facilities in asteroid belts can redirect operations to war production within 30 days. He looked around the chamber. And we have 3 billion people with military training. Not ancient history. Living veterans who served in peacekeeping operations or maintained the reserve fleet. The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. Rebecca watched the reactions with growing understanding. She had grown up in the peaceful era, never questioning why humanity's military seemed so small compared to their industrial capacity. Now she was learning the truth that older generations knew but rarely discussed. Morala raised her hand for silence. Are you saying, Envoy Walsh, that humanity could mobilize a war machine larger than any the galaxy has seen? I'm saying we already built one, David replied. Then we chose to put it away. The Richmond and ships like her are what we keep active to handle pirates and small disputes. The real military is sleeping, and we prefer it stays that way. Talira stood, her purple skin dark with concern. This raises questions of galactic security. A power of this magnitude could destabilize the entire council. It could, David agreed. That's why we've never talked about it openly. Humanity joined the council as observers, contributed to peacekeeping, and kept our history quiet. He looked at Druven. We didn't want to frighten anyone, but when threatened with conquest, we can't pretend to be defenseless. Anne stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of experience. The council should understand something. Every human in uniform today learns our history. We study the wars our ancestors fought, the mistakes they made, and the horror they created. We train to be ready to defend ourselves, but we also train to prevent conflict. She met the gaze of delegates around the chamber. We know what we're capable of. That's exactly why we choose peace. Druven spoke again, his voice heavy. I have requested to address the council because the Vrathari Empire wishes to learn from this experience. We ask permission to send military observers to study human defensive doctrine, not to copy your weapons, but to understand your philosophy. David looked at him with surprise. That's a significant request. It is necessary, Druven said simply. My empire grew through strength, but we never truly understood war. Humanity does. If we are to coexist in this galaxy, we must learn wisdom to match our power. Morala looked thoughtful. The council will consider this request, but first we must address the larger question. She turned to David. Humanity's revelation changes the balance of power in council space. How do we proceed? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. David took a moment before responding, aware that his next words would shape humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. The council proceeds exactly as it has been, David said finally. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We want to be part of it. But you could dominate it, said the Kraven representative, his antennae twitching nervously. With the forces you describe, no alliance could stand against you. We could have dominated Earth too, David replied. After the Consolidation Wars, the victorious coalition had the power to impose whatever government they wanted. Instead, they held elections. They included former enemies in the peace process. They chose cooperation over conquest. He gestured to the assembled delegates. We're making the same choice now, on a larger scale. Talira stood again, her diplomatic experience showing in her careful words. Envoy Walsh, the council appreciates your reassurances, but trust must be built on more than words. What guarantees can humanity offer? David had anticipated this question. We propose a mutual defense treaty. Human forces would be available to defend Council space against external threats, operating under Council oversight. In exchange, we seek full Council membership, not just observer status. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some delegates seemed relieved by the offer, while others looked skeptical. Marala let the conversation run for several minutes before calling for order. A defense treaty would require extensive negotiation, she said, but I believe the proposal has merit. However, there is another question we must address. She looked at David seriously. You mentioned that humanity has been protecting Council space indirectly. Please explain. David glanced at his military advisors, who nodded. For the past 40 years, human intelligence services have been monitoring threats to Council stability. We've intervened in situations where we believed the Council's survival was at risk. Intervened how? Demanded the Kraven. Mostly through information sharing with local governments, David explained. Sometimes through covert operations to disrupt pirate networks or weapons trafficking. In 3 cases, we quietly discouraged potential invasions by making it clear that attacking Council space would have consequences. The revelation caused another uproar. Several delegates were angry about the secrecy, while others wanted details about specific interventions. David waited for quiet before continuing. We kept these actions quiet because we didn't want to create fear or resentment. The goal was to help, not to control. He pulled up a classified file, declassified just for this meeting. 30 years ago, a species called the Rauk were preparing to invade the Outer Rim colonies. They had superior technology and overwhelming numbers. We leaked information about their invasion plans to Council security forces, then positioned human ships in strategic locations. The Rauk decided the risk wasn't worth the reward and withdrew. Anne added her own experience. 15 years ago, I was part of a task force that dismantled a pirate syndicate operating near the Savari home system. We traced their operations, identified their bases, and provided targeting data to local security forces. The pirates never knew human ships were involved. Talira's expression was difficult to read. You took it upon yourselves to act as guardians without asking permission. Yes, David admitted, we did. And I understand if you're angry about that, but consider the alternative. If we had announced our presence and capabilities 40 years ago, what would have happened? Fear, suspicion, possibly preemptive action by species who saw us as a threat. He spread his hands. We chose to help quietly and let the Council believe it was handling its own security. Deception, the Kraven said flatly. Protection, David countered. We remembered our own history when fear of others led to terrible decisions. We didn't want to trigger that same fear in the galaxy. Druven spoke unexpectedly. The humans' logic is sound. If they had revealed their true military power decades ago, my empire would likely have viewed them as competition. We might have formed alliances specifically to counter human expansion. He looked at David with grudging respect. By remaining quiet, you prevented an arms race that could have destabilized the entire galaxy. Marala raised her hand for silence again. This is a great deal of information to process. The Council will need time to debate these revelations and consider the human proposal. She looked at David. Are there any other secrets humanity wishes to reveal while we are on the subject? David smiled slightly. Nothing that would change the fundamental discussion. We have advanced research facilities, classified projects, and various defense initiatives. Every major spacefaring species has similar programs, but in terms of capabilities that would affect Council security, you now know what matters. What about your most advanced weapons? Asked a delegate from a species David didn't recognize. The Richmond was described as old and basic. What can your newest ships do? I won't answer that, David said politely but firmly. Just as I wouldn't expect you to reveal your most sensitive military capabilities, but I will say that our newest designs focus on defense and deterrence, not conquest. We build our ships to protect, not invade. Anne stepped forward again. If I may add something from a military perspective, the Council should know that human naval doctrine is fundamentally defensive. We design ships and train crews to respond to threats, not initiate them. Our strategic planning focuses on protecting territory and populations, not expanding into new ones. Because you already learned the costs of aggressive expansion, Talira observed. Exactly, Anne agreed. We tried empire building on Earth. We tried conquest and colonization and all the rest. It always ended in blood and regret. We're not interested in repeating those mistakes on a galactic scale. The Kraven representative stood, his insectoid features difficult to read but his body language suggesting agitation. How can we trust that humanity won't change its mind? Today you speak of peace, but what about in 100 years? 1,000. Your species lives with the capacity for violence. What prevents you from using it? David considered the question carefully. The same thing that's prevented us for the past 150 years. Education, memory, choice. Every generation of humans learns about the wars we fought, the weapons we built, and the horror we created. We teach our children that we are capable of terrible things, and that choosing not to do them is what makes us civilized. He looked around the chamber. We live with our capacity for violence by acknowledging it, understanding it, and consciously rejecting it every single day. That is a heavy burden, Talira said softly. Yes, David agreed, but it's ours to carry. We made the mess on Earth. We cleaned it up, and we'll keep choosing peace for as long as our species exists because we know the alternative too well. Marala stood, signaling the session was approaching its end. The Council will adjourn to consider everything we have learned. We will reconvene in 5 days to vote on humanity's proposal for full membership and the proposed defense treaty. She looked at David with an expression that might have been respect. Envoy Walsh, your people have given us much to think about. As delegates filed out, many approached David with questions or comments. Some were cautious, others curious. The Kraven representative avoided him entirely, while Druven actually nodded respectfully as he passed. The galaxy was processing a new reality, and reactions varied widely. Rebecca waited until they were alone before speaking. Sir, did we just completely reshape galactic politics? David packed up his tablet and smiled tiredly. We revealed the truth, Rebecca. What the galaxy does with that truth will determine the future. We just have to hope they make the right choice. 5 days felt like 5 months. The galaxy hummed with debate and speculation. News networks broadcast endless analyses of the Kellan Expanse engagement. Military experts from dozens of species studied every second of recorded footage, trying to understand how the Richmond had moved with such precision. Political theorists argued about what humanity's revelation meant for the balance of power. On Earth, people watched the proceedings with mixed feelings. Most humans had grown up knowing their history but never thinking about it in galactic terms. Now they were learning that their peaceful existence depended on strength their ancestors had built and their generation maintained. It was both humbling and sobering. The council chamber filled again on the 5th day. Every seat was occupied, and additional observers stood in designated areas. This vote would affect the entire galaxy, and everyone wanted to witness it. David sat at the human delegation table with Anne beside him. Rebecca had returned to Earth to brief government officials, replaced by senior diplomat named Howard Chen who specialized in treaty negotiations. The atmosphere felt different from 5 days ago. Less fearful, more contemplative. Marala called the session to order. We have debated humanity's proposal extensively. Before the vote, I wish to share some findings from our investigation teams. She activated a display showing data compiled by council researchers. Over the past 5 days, We have examined records of unexplained events in Council space, pirate groups that dissolved suddenly, invasion fleets that withdrew for unclear reasons, defense technologies that appeared in local databases with no clear origin. The display showed dozens of incidents spanning 40 years. In each case, we can now trace human involvement, information passed through intermediaries, equipment provided through untraceable channels, strategic advice given to local commanders at critical moments. Marala looked at David. Humanity has been protecting the Council since before most current delegates took office. Talira stood. I have personally reviewed the Ralk incident mentioned by Envoy Walsh. Human intelligence prevented a war that would have cost millions of lives. They asked for nothing in return and never took credit. Her skin shifted to a warm purple, indicating approval among her people. This is not the behavior of conquerors. It is the behavior of guardians. Druvan rose next, drawing surprised looks. The Vrathari Empire wishes to speak in favor of humanity's membership proposal. We have learned difficult truths about ourselves through this process. We believe strength meant the willingness to use force. Humanity has shown us that true strength is the wisdom to restrain it. He looked at David. I spent 3 days studying your consolidation wars. The destruction your species inflicted upon itself exceeds anything in Vrathari history. Yet you stopped. You chose peace. That demonstrates strength beyond anything we have achieved. Other delegates spoke, some in support, some raising concerns. The Kraven representative remained skeptical but acknowledged humanity's contributions to Council security. A delegate from the peaceful harmonic species worried about normalizing military power, but admitted humanity's philosophy of defensive preparation had merit. After 2 hours of discussion, Marala called for the vote. The question before the Council is twofold. First, shall humanity be granted full Council membership? Second, shall we accept their proposal for a mutual defense treaty? These measures will be voted on together as they are linked in purpose. The voting system activated. Each delegate had 3 options: approve, reject, or abstain. The results would be displayed once everyone had voted. David sat calmly, though his hands were clasped tightly in his lap. Anne remained expressionless, years of military discipline keeping her emotions hidden. The votes came in quickly. Within minutes, the results appeared on the central display: 78% in favor, 15% abstaining, 7% opposed. The threshold for approval was 60%. The chamber erupted in applause from some species, while others sat in thoughtful silence. Humanity had just become a full member of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy had just gained its most powerful defender. Marala smiled, an expression of genuine warmth. The measure passes. Humanity is welcomed as a full Council member, and the Mutual Defense Treaty is accepted pending final negotiations. She looked at David. Envoy Walsh, do you wish to address the Council? David stood, taking a moment to compose his thoughts. Thank you. On behalf of humanity, I accept this responsibility with humility and commitment. We will honor the trust you have placed in us. He paused. But I want to make something clear. This isn't about humanity protecting the galaxy. It's about all of us protecting each other. We bring military experience and capability, yes, but you bring wisdom, culture, science, and perspectives we lack. Together, we can build something better than any single species could achieve alone. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates from different species. Humanity's history teaches us that diversity is strength. We spent 10,000 years fighting each other because we feared our differences. We finally achieved peace when we learned to value them instead. The Council represents that same principle on a galactic scale. Different species, different views working together. Anne stood beside him. From a military standpoint, I want to assure the Council that human forces will operate under strict civilian oversight. We have protocols developed over centuries to ensure our military serves the people, not the other way around. Those same protocols will apply to our Council defense operations. Talira rose once more. I have a question for Captain Akafor. During the engagement with Vrathari forces, you disabled their ships without causing casualties. Was this standard procedure? Anne nodded. Yes, Ambassador. Human military doctrine prioritizes minimum necessary force. We train to neutralize threats with the least amount of destruction possible. Killing is always the last resort, not the first option. Because you understand the cost, Talira said softly. Because we've paid it too many times, Anne replied. The session continued with procedural matters. Treaty language needed refinement. Command structures for joint operations required definition. Integration timelines had to be established, but the fundamental decision was made. The galaxy had accepted humanity not despite their military power, but because they had learned to control it. As the formal session ended and delegates began informal discussions, Druven approached David. The war commander's expression was serious but not hostile. I have been authorized to formalize the Vrathari Empire's request for military observers. We wish to send officers to study at human defense academies. David extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. We would be honored to host them. Learning from each other makes both our peoples stronger. Druven studied the offered hand before taking it in one of his four. I hope you understand that this is difficult for my people. We built an empire on the belief that strength meant conquest. Accepting that we were wrong about fundamental principles is challenging. I do understand, David said. Humanity faced the same challenge. It took us years to change our thinking and we're still working on it. Change is hard, but it's possible. Later that evening, David and Anne stood in an observation lounge overlooking Earth. The planet turned slowly below them, blue and green and peaceful. Ships moved in orbital patterns, civilian traffic going about normal business. Defense platforms hung in silent watch, ready but not aggressive. Do you think they really understand, Anne asked quietly, what it took for us to become what we are? David considered the question. Some do. Talira has studied our history extensively. Druven is starting to grasp it. Others will learn over time. He looked at the planet below. But they don't need to understand everything. They just need to know that we made a choice and we stand by it. What if something happens? Anne pressed. What if we face a real threat and have to activate the reserve fleet? What if the galaxy sees what we're really capable of? Then they'll see that we only use that capability to defend, never to attack, David said firmly. That's the difference between us and every empire that came before. We have the power to conquer, but we choose to protect instead. Every single day, we make that choice. Anne smiled slightly. That's a good answer, almost makes it sound simple. It is simple, David said. Not easy, but simple. Choose peace. Build bridges, protect the weak. Honor the differences that make us stronger together. He looked at her. Our ancestors figured that out after thousands of years of getting it wrong. We just have to keep the lesson alive. Far below, Earth continued its eternal rotation. Humanity had walked a long and bloody path to reach this moment of galactic acceptance. They had learned terrible lessons and paid awful prices, but they had emerged from their dark history with wisdom and strength, ready to stand as guardians for a galaxy that was finally learning to trust them. The choice they made every day, the choice to be better than their capacity for violence, was the real victory. Not the ships in storage or the weapons in reserve, but the decision to keep those things as insurance rather than instruments of conquest. That was the lesson humanity offered the galaxy, written in their history and proven by their actions. David turned from the window, ready to begin the detailed work of integrating human forces into Council defense operations. There would be challenges ahead, misunderstandings to overcome, and ongoing efforts to maintain trust. But for now, humanity had taken its place among the stars not as conquerors but as partners, and that made all the difference.